Destiny has been through some wild up and downs over the past 8 years or so, and a lot of new players haven't experienced many of the crazy things that veteran Destiny players have lived through. So today we're taking a look at many of the things that only veteran Destiny players know about. Did you know that Mantling actually didn't exist in Destiny 1? That's right, the mechanic that has saved countless Guardian lives in Destiny 2 actually wasn't a thing in the original version of Destiny. I can't even tell you how many times during PvP or during a raid I would fall to my death because I would just barely miss that surface. It's definitely one of those things that veteran players out there really appreciate and new players just don't know how good they have it. We can all get a little frustrated when we don't get the god roll that we're desperately seeking in Destiny 2, but luckily we do have crafting these days which will help us get the god roll on at least the craftable weapons. But for a short time back in Destiny 1, we actually had a weapon re-rolling system that was really popular. Many Guardians, including myself, spent thousands of materials re-rolling our weapons just to get that perfect roll. In particular, I probably spent thousands of motes trying to get the perfect roll on the sniper rifle Her Benevolence. Newer Destiny players don't understand the sheer terror of playing Trials of Osiris years ago when desperate gamers out there would transform into actual cyber criminals just to boot you offline with a DDoS style attack to secure their W. This pathetic behavior was unfortunately all too common before Bungie changed their networking structure to hide IP addresses. But the sponsor of this video saved countless Trials cards before Bungie finally fixed things on their end. One of the only ways to prevent being a victim of these types of attacks is to use a VPN, and NordVPN is the fastest and most reliable option on the market. Seriously, you can't imagine how many Crucible players have been saved from a denial of service attack thanks to these guys. But even though the Crucible is a bit safer these days, there's still a ton of great reasons to use a VPN service. Let's say you're in a coffee shop or traveling in an airport and the only Wi-Fi network available is Drifter's free, totally not sketchy Wi-Fi. Well, first of all, maybe don't connect to that one, but what if you have a report that you absolutely need to send before a deadline that's looming and it's your only choice? Well, you better be using a VPN to protect your data. Who knows what kind of trouble this guy could get you into. Nord also has an automatic kill switch, so if the VPN connection accidentally drops, it will automatically block your device from the web until it gets reconnected. Beyond internet privacy, there's also a ton of other reasons to use a VPN. These days, a lot of online content is region locked by country, but with a single click of a button, you can be instantly relocated digitally to countries all over the world and able to watch that content. Maybe some show you want to watch isn't available in your country. Well, no problem, just change your virtual location and you can watch it right away. If this sounds like a pretty good deal, then try out NordVPN today. It's risk-free with a 30-day money-back guarantee. You can save big by going to nordvpn.com/pattycakes and use coupon code pattycakes at checkout. In Destiny 2 though, we actually had a different kind of weapon rerolling before the crafting system was ever born. In the old days, you could actually spend some materials to reroll the Masterwork on weapons. You couldn't pick it directly like you can in the new crafting system, but if you rolled it enough times, hopefully you would eventually get the one that you were looking for. I really wish this was a thing on modern weapons so that we could curb that RNG just a little bit. In Destiny 2, at the end of a PvP game, you can see whatever weapons that you got from the match. But in Destiny 1, you could see whatever anyone in the lobby would get as a drop, and every once in a while, some lucky person would get a crazy exotic drop like a Hawkmoon or a Yallarhorn. If you've played the Grasp of Avarice dungeon in Destiny 2, you might be wondering where all these crazy engrams are coming from. Well, very early Destiny 1 players will definitely remember the original loot cave, which by far was the most efficient way to get legendary weapons in early Destiny 1. It didn't last all that long before Bungie nerfed it, but they did at least leave a little tribute to it.
1,000,000 deaths are not enough for Master Rahool.
Destiny 2 still has a lot of planetary materials, but in Destiny 1 these were incredibly important for many parts of the game. It was the only way to upgrade your weapons and armor, and you needed a lot of them to do so. They were so important that there's actually guides on YouTube of the most efficient routes to farm these, and many players would get really mad whenever another Guardian would run into their loop and start messing up their rotation. Back in Destiny 1, we had these things called ammo synthesis that we would use to fill up our ammo reserves. We had them for primary ammo, special ammo, and heavy ammo. It was basically like an early version of those raid banners, except every player was responsible for their own synthesis. The problem though is that these were on a cooldown timer, and if you wiped during a raid boss fight, you would lose some of your ammo. It was definitely one of the more frustrating parts of Destiny 1's endgame, and I'm really glad that we now have the raid banner system instead. These days in Destiny 2, every weapon's elemental type is predetermined, but in early Destiny 1, you could actually use a mod that would change the element. You could add these to any of the energy slot weapons that you had in your inventory. Arguably the hardest boss in all of Destiny 1 was this simple Vandal. He was nicknamed Randal The Vandal by the Destiny community because of his insane health pool. It would take your entire fireteam's ammo reserves many times over just to take him out. In Destiny 2, as soon as you get either a weapon or armor drop, you can basically use them at full effectiveness immediately. You might need to invest some materials to get them up to the maximum level, but as long as you have them, you can use them right away. But in Destiny 1, you actually had to gain XP to level these items up before you could use them and get access to all their perks. So if you got a roll on a weapon that you really wanted to test out because they got a cool perk combination, That meant that you had to spend a lot of XP on that weapon in order to fully try it. Back when Destiny 2 first launched, there was actually no special ammo at all. The special ammo weapons we think of today like snipers, shotties, and fusion rifles were actually in the power slot. This meant that if you wanted to use a sniper in PvP, you had to choose between a rocket launcher and your favorite sniper rifle. Personally, I still like to go with the sniper, but most of the people out there would just use a grenade launcher. When the Forsaken expansion finally came around, they reintroduced special ammo and brought back snipers, fusion rifles, shotguns, and breech-loaded grenade launchers to be options that use special ammo. The last word has been complained about in one sense or another pretty much ever since the very beginning of Destiny. Modern players might think the hipfire accuracy is too generous, and when it first came back into Destiny 2, it was almost like a machine gun when you're aiming down sights on PC. But without a doubt, the most broken time in the last word's history was actually in vanilla Destiny 1. It would gain bonus damage while hip firing just like today, but those bullets would do 111 damage. And what made it truly broken is that it would often glitch out and give you that 111 even while you're aiming down sights. This was easily one of the most powerful weapons in early Destiny 1 and cemented the exotic hand cannon meta. Alongside the last word during this exotic hand cannon meta was Thorn. In very early Destiny 1, this thing wasn't considered to be too hot by the community and it only came with 6 shots in the magazine. But after a buff, the usage really shot up in the Crucible and people realized that they could 2-tap. If you landed both headshots in PvP, that burn damage was just enough to take out your enemy. And what was perhaps even more powerful is that you could get a headshot with a Thorn and then land an arc bolt grenade for an easy cleanup. If you started playing Destiny anytime after the first year or so of its lifespan, you would probably recognize Nolan North's voice as the same as your Ghost. But that actually wasn't the case during very early Destiny 1. The original Ghost was voiced by Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones. When the Taken King expansion came out, Nolan redid all of the voice lines from the original Ghost. Back in Destiny 1, each class had their own unique materials required to upgrade their armor. Warlocks had Hadronic Essence, Hunters had Sapphire Wire, and Titans had Plasteel Plating. Later on though, these were all simplified into a single material. In both Destiny 1 and modern Destiny, you're probably accustomed to chasing your own perfect god roll, but in year 1 of Destiny 2, there was actually no such thing as a god roll because every single weapon was a static roll. Bungie experimented with taking away random rolls and the community really didn't like it in general. So about a year after Destiny 2 came out, the random rolls were back. You might think of the Cryptarch in the tower as your friendly neighborhood vendor, but back in Destiny 1, this guy was absolutely hated. That's because you would often bring him a legendary engram and he would convert it all the way down to a blue. But every once in a while, if it was your lucky day, he might take a blue and turn it into a purple or even an exotic. Leave a comment down below if you remember what Forever 29 means. If you were playing during the first year of Destiny and experiencing the very first Vault of Glass raid, you probably remember how tough it was to get the exact armor you needed to drop. That's because the only way to reach the maximum level of 30, which was the first power level cap at the very beginning of Destiny 1, you had to get the exact right drops from the hard mode version of Vault of Glass. This was particularly frustrating as a player because there was no way to get around this. If you didn't get lucky, you were stuck for another week at 29. This frustration led many players to making 3 of the exact same class so they had 3 chances each week to get those drops. In Destiny 2, if you want to play Trials of Osiris, all you have to do is buy the card that you want from Save 14 and then go hop into the playlist. But in Destiny 1, there's a few more decisions to be made. Back then, we had a currency called Passage Coins and something called Boons that could be purchased with them. You would use these things to upgrade your Trials card, like for example buying a Mercy to forgive your first loss, buying your very first win for free on the card, or getting a 2-for-1 special. In Destiny 1, Xur was quite a bit harder to find on the map than he is today, and it was definitely worth finding him because he had some really great stuff to sell. For example, he sold one of the best guns in the game, the Yaller Horn, in very early Destiny, and many players didn't even know how good it was yet because no one had tried it. So for several months to come, players missed out on LFG groups because they didn't have this rocket launcher. But Xur also sold some really cool consumables. For example, he had something called 3 of Coins, which would increase your chances at your next exotic, or Glass Needles, which could be used to reroll your exotic armor. You might think special weapons are annoying in Destiny 2, but in Destiny 1 there was a perk called Final Round which made them even more powerful. At the beginning of any Trials of Osiris match, you would hear people shooting off their sniper shots into the distance, and when they activated the perk Final Round, for example with their Aphrodite Spear, they could one-shot you to the body. This was by far one of the more frustrating parts of the Trials meta for many months. Another meta that was really frustrating to deal with was the Pocket Infinity. This was maybe the buggiest weapon in all of Destiny 1, and it also was one of the most powerful. After you charge up your first fusion rifle shot, it would empty the rest of the magazine in auto-fire mode. Luckily, this thing was pretty rare because not many people got the exotic bounty to get it, but wow, it sure melted Guardians incredibly fast. Another one of the most frustrating bosses in Destiny history was actually a simple object. The simple forklift found in the Sparrow Racing League was one of the most dangerous objects in the entire game. Many modern Destiny 2 players will complain about how difficult some of the Grandmaster Nightfalls are, but the regular old Nightfalls from Destiny 1 were arguably just as hard in some situations. These would come with particular burns that made some of them incredibly difficult. Having Arc Burn on, for example, against the Hive meant that you were taking 3 times the normal damage from those Hive wizards. And if your full fire team wiped at the same time, you go right back to orbit just like modern Grandmasters. The upside though was that if you managed to beat these, you got a sweet glow over your head for the whole rest of the week that you could show off from the tower. If you played during early Destiny 1, there's a chance you might remember the very first and only Queen's Wrath event. This had some unique bounties and some really great weapons. In particular, it dropped the Supremacy Sniper Rifle, which is probably my favorite sniper in all of Destiny 1. This one is one of the more annoying parts of Destiny 1. Many players might have forgotten this, but there's actually a cooldown to how often you could sprint in Destiny. If you sprinted long enough and then went back to walking, there was about a 2-second cooldown where you couldn't sprint again. Later on, they actually implemented an artifact you could use that would get rid of this effect. Luckily, this is not something to worry about in Destiny 2. Speaking of artifacts, Destiny 1 had all kinds of different artifacts from the Iron Lords that you could use to change your character. There was one that would take away your super but give you an extra grenade and melee charge and some small boosts to your stats. There was one that improved your radar, one that let you reflect things with your sword, one that helped you resist damage over time things in the Crucible, and definitely the most famous and frustrating one was the Memory of Scory. When your super was full, you could charge your teammates' supers faster just by standing close to each other. This became a huge problem in Trials of Osiris. Another thing that became a huge issue in Trials of Osiris was the Icebreaker. This was the exotic sniper rifle that could recharge its own ammo just by waiting around. But it's probably actually better known for its ability to cheese bosses. If you could find a safe spot during pretty much any boss fight in the entire game, you could sit there with your Icebreaker and plink away until the boss eventually died. In early Destiny 1, the perk Armor Piercing Rounds did a lot more than it does today. It would actually allow you to shoot through solid objects, including walls. Once people got wind of this in the Crucible, everyone's new favorite strategy was the wall bang. I have to admit, I probably got several hundred of these kills and it was really fun to do, although I'm glad it's not in the game anymore. One of the most popular ways to play Warlock in early Destiny 1 was to use the Viking Funeral build. This would double the length of how long things burned you in PvP. So Guardians would use the last word along with a firebolt grenade to hit one shot and then let you burn to death. It was without a doubt one of the most powerful PvP builds at the time. In early Destiny 2, there was a Trials of the Nine mode called Countdown. This was clearly inspired by tactical shooters like Counter-Strike and had kind of a mixed reaction from the community. Some people absolutely loved it and many definitely hated it. I don't know if it was the right fit for Trials, but I do give Bungie props for trying different modes. Back in Destiny 1, the 3 factions actually made a really big difference in the game. You could only pledge to one at a time per character, and some of the weapons that they had were really good. I remember spending hours and hours on the Cosmodrome farming XP just to get my next drop from Dead Orbit. They also had some really rare shaders and ships that were highly coveted by the community. You might think that we have a lot of borderline useless materials in Destiny 2, but Destiny 1 definitely had its own fair share. There's so many of these that have been left behind. We had Motes of Light, Radiant Energy and Shards, Ascendant Energy, Strange Coins, Glass Needles, 3 of Coins, Passage Coins, Telemetries to level up all of your different weapons faster, Consumables to get Glimmer from particular mobs like Black Wax Idol, Ether Seeds and Resupply Codes, Reputation Boosters from the Crucible and the Vanguard, and on and on. If there's one thing we know that Bungie loves to do, it is making new materials and consumables. One of the systems I'd really love to see Bungie bring back from Destiny 1 was the Skeleton Key system. You would use these keys to get specific loot at the end of strikes. For example, Guardians would spend an endless amount of time trying to get a perfect Imago loop to drop from the Undying Mind strike. This system could bring a lot of relevancy back to Destiny 2 strikes. One of the cooler things ever added to Destiny was the introduction of the EV30 Tumbler Sparrow. This thing could do some amazing stunts and really opened up the creativity of the community. I'll never forget when Guardians first used this thing to cross that entire chasm in the middle of the moon. For a short while in Destiny 1 after the Hammer Titan was introduced, there was a glitch where you could throw the hammers incredibly fast. It was pretty funny to do and could definitely melt a boss if you're able to pull it off. One of the most satisfying feats in all of Destiny 1 was to pull off the infamous one tap with the Hawkmoon. It came with 3 lucky bullets in the magazine, and every once in a while you could get the stars to align and have all 3 of those lucky bullets land on the same person. This would result in the infamous one tap in PvP. Back in Destiny 1, certain primary weapons actually had elemental damage. These were incredibly useful but also very rare because they only came from Trials of Osiris or raids. Later on, most primary weapons didn't come with an elemental burn, so if you had any of these early ones, they were particularly special. Engrams back in Destiny 1 would actually tell you what slot they would drop in before you decrypted them. So for example, if you had a class item or a special weapon or a heavy weapon, you could tell what you were about to get from Rahool. The speaker in Destiny 1 had some of the best class item drip available in the whole game. I still remember saving up my materials trying to get some of those awesome Hunter cloaks he had for sale. One of the things many Destiny 1 players have probably forgotten is that you actually had to go to orbit before you could pick any new activities. These days you can be chilling in the tower and then pick a Crucible game or a strike or go to some planet, but back then you had to go all the way to orbit before you could choose your next activity. There was a secret basketball room in the King's Fall raid that the community went absolutely wild over. We thought this would lead to more cool secrets and people spent hours and hours trying to figure it out, but it turned out it was just for fun. And last on our list is an exotic bounty that many players wish they could forget. A Light in the Dark was the bounty that was required to get the original Thorn hand cannon, and part of this quest was to get 500 points in PvP using only void damage. But the thing that really rubbed people the wrong way is that deaths would make you lose progress. Over the next few months, Reddit was absolutely full of posts with people complaining about how tough this bounty was to pull off. I still remember using the Atheon's epilogue to finish mine, and that was during a time where the hunters didn't even have a void subclass yet. Up next, check out my video on 57 incredible weapon details in Destiny 2. It's linked on screen and in the description.